I would like to start by thanking all our guests here, all our participants. My name is Tarek Bawab. I am the Dean of Engineering and Applied Science at Nile University, and we have the pleasure to be organizing this webinar. We have a talk by Professor Vincent Chan, MIT professor and the president of IEEE Communication Society, and the topic is Future Network Architectures and Influences of the Pandemic. Talk about technical, funding, regulations, and policy aspects of.
You hear me okay?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. This is not the first paragraph. Let me go back. Okay, so it's a pleasure for me to give this lecture. I just want to tell all of you in Egypt that I was always fascinated with Egypt. In fact, my dream trip is to take a 2-week cruise up the Nile with a history professor and visit all the historic sites and have him tell me about the rich history of Egypt. And I have yet to do this in my life. If this has been an in-person meeting, I would have done so after the talk, but I would have to wait until pandemic is over. And at that point, I would come and personally shake hands with all of you. I accepted this invitation from Tarek. Not only is he a friend of mine, I twisted his arm when I formed my own board of governors in January to be a director in the Communication Society. So I guess I owe him to do whatever he wants. On the other hand, I think this is an extremely important topic. The use of network and communication technology in the pandemic is really come to the forefront. Without it, imagine what would happen. So interestingly, many of the technology people are using has its heritage from some of the inventions and pioneering work of some of our members in the Communication Society, from wireless to the early days of internet and networking. In fact, some of the fathers of the internet, most of them are still alive, and many of them actually I know well. Some of them had been at MIT before when they were student or junior faculty. So I'm proud to work on network and communication technology, and it has impact in this pandemic. On the other hand, this pandemic brings this very important technology to the limelight. And it is more than the technical aspect. It is also about social economic impact of this technology in the day and age of a pandemic or even post-pandemic. I think the new normal after the pandemic would be very different. And the question to us is, in addition to improving the technology, which we should, what else should we be thinking about in terms of policies and regulation and who funds the system? So I would intermix my comment today between technical aspect and the future 5G and 6G and what is networking moving to us in the future, and how the pandemic highlights some of the necessary changes or addition in the technical aspect and also in the social economic aspect of this technology. So I want to show you the new paradigm as of a few years ago, maybe a decade. The traditional world of service provider, your telephone company, your TV company that provide both entertainment and internet service to you, change a little bit. Here comes what I call the web scale technology, the Apples, the Google, and the Facebook, and the Microsoft, and Tencent, and Alibaba of the world. In those areas, they actually provide more than just transport, but lots of contents. In fact, content is the driver. If you look at the undersea capacity today, actually more than 90% of the capacity is owned by these web scale companies, not by the telecom traditional operators. So that tells you that things are very different in the last few years than ever before. In fact, on the left side of the major data center that many of this company own, and I only listed the American ones. Of course, there are many Asian and European data centers sprinkled around the world. So that is a new paradigm, which is content-based. If you look at what's going on in terms of the network and how it's actually going to be used, the network is no longer going to be a very simple transport like a sewage system, like a utility. It actually is much more intelligent than that. It would actually mediate between application, as we're using Zoom and WebEx today, deal with cloud, deal with all kinds of analytics, storage, and computing services with all kinds of people on a campus, in branches of companies or government, and also with mobile user. The idea is that this technology requires dynamically tailored network configuration, which is the thought that I want you to keep in mind when I go on in this particular talk. And as I said before, now is 90%, and it's going to be that way in the foreseeable future. Just to bring everybody to speed on a paradigm which I think is beginning to be installed now in the next 5 years is going to look this way. The future networking, not only does it have the communications and the network aspect, but it would also have cloud storage and cloud processing. In fact, all of these medium would work together. I'm going to reserve the word orchestration later towards the talk. But what's happening is that all the medium, from wireless to fiber to many of these other computing services, including edge computing, work in concert to provide services. The fiber is used for the backhaul. In fact, the fiber may actually conduct the RF or microwave signal all the way to the processing center for processing. This allows multiple antenna elements to actually gang together in the processing center to perform beamforming, actually antenna nulling, and many kinds of location and signal processing. So it is a very important future that there is spatial and temporal multipath resolution using multiple access points. And this would allow us to reduce interference and at the same time increase data rate. There's a feedback from somewhere. Maybe we should have some of this transmitter muted.
Yeah, it's okay now. It's okay.
Yeah, okay, fine. So the key innovation, in addition to antenna processing, are massively parallel low-cost computing cloud, which can be used for communication and also application processing. And very interestingly, low-cost fast A to D. A to D to get today can go as high as 100 gigasample per second. That's really very fast. And that allows us to conduct a lot of analog signal, even in the microwave area, to processing center for processing. And last but not least is the presence of very fast algorithm, including AI and machine learning, and they would do a whole lot in the future, which I'm going to have a lot to say about later. So first, let's talk about pandemic and the use of virtual platform. As every one of you know, we are going to use, we have been using a lot of the virtual platform for education, business negotiation, remote medical consultation, and all these things. And the type of platform, people are used to WebEx and Zoom, and then there are more fancy ones. One of them is ON24. In addition to being able to do teleconference like what we're doing over Zoom, ON24 does some more, like virtual tour of multiple rooms. You can make yourself walk into rooms, interact with those who happen to be in the room or choose to be in the room. So that's a locality aspect of it. And also you can participate in community of interest. So if you're interested in a conference on wireless access point, you can find among the thousands of people in the conference a group of 10, 20 people who wants to talk about this subject. So it is not perfected. In fact, we just had a virtual conference done this week, and we use Zoom. There are lots of things to improve on. So we now have to ask ourselves, what kind of broadband access is required to do business? As we talk about, and the pandemic really makes it come to the forefront. The application, first of all, is to education. My school, of course, had gone virtual, and there were plenty of courses and material now offered on the web. Conferences for sure, business negotiation, remote medical consultation, that's very important. More than 80% of the medical consultations in the last few months are remote. Sporting events, actually, we in America love sports, and they are thinking about how to do this event without an audience. Only the players are present, and how do they beam the real-time game to all the audience, and religious services as well. How do you participate? So the technology requirement of virtual meetings, you need to have a minimum of a couple of megabits per second to get high enough resolution video. And actually on the high end, which I want to explain, it requires multi-gigabit per second. We are actually on the low end right now. Most people are actually closer to low end. So the question is, how much data rate is enough? I think that 10 megabit for low-end video conferencing and education, that's sufficient for the time being, although not ideal, but it's good enough for the time being. For future, 100 megabit for high-end conferencing. And I said low-end business. Why? It turns out Cisco actually make another version, not WebEx, of Cisco conferencing, which I had fielded at MIT, a experimental copy. They have 3 very high resolution screen, and also sharing. It's the forerunner of WebEx, and it requires tens of megabits per second. And the higher end even requires some more. It's not fielded yet, because most people don't have that capacity. And if you really want good business negotiation and meeting, you really need gigabit per second. And maybe you should have interactive virtual reality as well. The ultimate, which I think it would be required, has a high data rate of 10 gigabit per second. My God, 10 gigabit per second, we're talking about huge amount of increase in data rate, like 3 orders of magnitude. Who wants 10 gigabit per second? Actually, I'll give you an example. I was treated recently in a research lab where a big room has an entire wall of video. And what I could do is hold a tennis racket, and I'm playing tennis with a guy on the other side of the network. Wow, that's really something. In addition to being very high resolution, it's more than 8K. It's probably, I don't know, many times HDTV resolution, so that you actually feel like the person is on the other side. But in addition to that, I can actually have very high quality audio. I can hear the ball hit by his record or her record, and also I can hear it bounce. I can hear it hit the tape of the net, and I can see from the field of view, when I turn to hit a ball, I can see the other person's position from the corner of my eye. So there has to be a three-dimensional image presented to me, and also associated with it what I call a three-dimensional sound field. That means the sound must come from the location where the event is in a very broad field of view area. If you are audiophile, you probably would know what I mean by three-dimensional sound field. If you look very carefully on the right-hand side of my shoulder, you will see a vacuum tube power amplifier that helps me to produce that sound field. It's non-trivial. If you want to do a digitized version of it, it's actually gigabit per second. And if you want to play ball, a tennis match, you need very low delay. The minimum is 80 milliseconds is barely enough. People would like it to be something like 20. So anyway, so that's the high end. We're not there yet. We're somewhere between 10 and 100 megabits for most people. In addition to those rates, there's more than that. You have to have resilient connections so that you wouldn't have choke points, and you wouldn't have freeze frame, and you wouldn't have loss of the application, and you have to restart. So I started working with the industry, AT&T, in 1990, and we were negotiating with AT&T about high data rate. At that point, they was trying to sell 1 megabit per second to the customer. So the VP of research, Bob Lucky, one of our members of ComSoc, many of you may know him, asked me, hey, how much data rate is enough for business negotiation? Okay, so I said, well, I can't tell you what the data rate is. It's more than data rate. It's the presentation, is all these things I just said. And I said, you would know that it's good enough for very serious business negotiation when the video and audio are good enough to play serious poker with. I don't know how many poker players among you, but that's not a game of chance. That's a very psychological signaling, subtle signaling kind of game. And it requires all this high resolution stuff. Okay, so how are we doing in terms of supporting this kind of data rate in the future? And what I would come to what needs to be changed in lieu of the pandemic. Well, in the metropolitan area, you have the fiber, which is that line in the middle. And then you have wireless access point, and these are Internet of Things points, and also mobile user. And then you have edge computing, called fog, okay? And then you have centralized cloud, and an engine here to do what is called orchestration. This network engine is the brain of the network. It's all automated. No human should be in the loop. And this orchestration engine has been programmed by the operator using their policy, the price structure, to orchestrate services for the user. Some user really require time deadline service. If I'm actually doing real-time gaming, I really want time sensitive deadline service. If I'm doing fast trading, I definitely want very short time delay. However, if I'm downloading a movie, it doesn't matter if it's 5 seconds or 8 seconds to download the whole movie into my local cache. So I don't need that kind of time deadline service. So the orchestration engine should be able to understand the services required and orchestrate the services across this infrastructure to suit that particular service. What is and I'll come back to the alternative, okay? One of the things is the following. When I'm talking about mediation and being very smart and looking at the content of each one of the sessions and what they want in terms of data rate, time deadline, and things like that, human cannot do this. There shouldn't be operators. It has to be automated. But unfortunately, if you look at the complexity of controlling the system, as you increase in time, you can also think of it as increase in data rate, the complexity becomes so difficult that no human can do it, so you need to have smarter algorithm. And the intelligence in the algorithm is very necessary. And I'm coming back to that in just a bit to talk about the importance of intelligence. This is the break point at this particular juncture of network development. So I want to talk about orchestration a little bit and what it does and what it does not do, okay? Clearly, I said in the future, you need this to do the right thing. The current system performance, when you do video conferencing, there has been some impediment, some of which is low delivery rates, freeze frames, sometimes the application crash, and sometimes they have security issue and low display resolution depending on your device. So what is the option to improve the infrastructure to make the performance better? Well, one obvious way of doing it is to install capacity, which is what people are doing now. It's called over-provisioning. You never let the network get congested. You never let the server get overwhelmed. So you have to increase its I/O speed. Well, that's easier said than done. You can do it, but it costs you an arm and a leg. In fact, in order for many of this congestion behavior not to show up, your network should be loaded only up to about 15 to 20%. And that's much too low in loading for you to recover your investment. So it sounds simple, but you can't afford it. Orchestration is the solution, where it's content-based dynamic services, where in this block, it would take the service you need and you would mediate with the low-end network and also the computing service to deliver the service. But you have to have the smartness. You have to increase your complexity of your control plane. So it's very important to have a sophisticated network control plane and service quality driven. Now, you need to talk about regulation and policy, which I'm coming in the next couple of view graphs, and pricing, so that people can afford it. But this is the solution of some in terms of philosophy. This is the philosophy of what you should know. So I want to talk about a very important subject now called the affordable broadband access to all, as one of the major questions that follow us in the pandemic. So I'll give you a very specific example. Example is that you notice that education now is now remote and virtual. Not only university education with a large number of courses, but also high school and grade school. However, not every family has broadband Wi-Fi. In fact, some families in US doesn't even have Wi-Fi. They at most have a smartphone, but they have limited data plan also because of cost issue. So now the gulf of rich and poor is now accentuated because the one who have a high resolution monitor, Wi-Fi, and multiple platform now can enjoy much better programming and actually have a much better experience with the educational material. The ones who doesn't have the facility would be actually very handicapped. In fact, when you show up in class, you don't distinguish the rich and the poor, and they all receive the same instruction for the teacher. Now the digital divide and the gulf in data rate make you actually experience the difference in resources. And this gulf would widen as time goes on. Imagine the student didn't get high quality education because he's trying to squint his eye to look at the smartphone, whereas the other guy had a 30-inch monitor and high quality audio. And then it would be very hard to catch up if this goes on. Now, post-pandemic, I would still see a lot of material being on the web. No longer is it just in-person meeting. I don't think it's going to change. It will be a hybrid. then how are these disadvantages going to catch up? I think this gulf would widen, and it doesn't take too long. I would say 6 months to a year, you will see the effect. And unfortunately, many of these disadvantaged people in terms of capacity, after a while, they're not going to be as savvy as the one who get the full treatment, and sometimes they be labeled unfairly as intellectually inferior, which is a shame. So I think universal broadband access that's affordable has to be enforced somehow by the community. When community does it, it's not going to be profit driven. It's not going to be done by the operator. The government and public policy must somehow institute such affordable universal access. In the US, there's such an example. In the 50s, there's a thing called the Carter phone landmark case in the Supreme Court when Bell chose to only supply phone service to the people in the city. And when you live very far away in remote places in a farm, because they need to pull a long wire to you, they will lose money if they give you a phone service. They did not install phone. And then the court case said you have to provide access to everyone. And even if you lose money, you have to provide it at the same cost as the one that you have easy access to. So I think some kind of public policy of such thing has to be done. Now, is it easy or is it hard? Well, let me tell you, this week I found out in the country of Ireland, they have decided to provide 150 megabit access to everyone. What that means is that they have to increase the rate of access of 500,000 homes. This is at the cost of several $1 billion to the Irish government. Well, it's a medium-sized country, and in terms of geographic span, it's also not very large. I don't even know whether we can push such a policy through in the United States. So this is a very difficult question, but it's doable. So now let me talk about content-based routing and charging versus something called net neutrality. For a long while, people in the internet, especially some of the pioneers, saying the internet service provider cannot treat communication with different colors. You have to treat everything with equality. You can't discriminate or charge differently based on user content, website, platform application, and things like that. Well, in its pure form, it has to be changed, because in order to be able to support many of this conferencing and platform, you need to have content-based routing. And also when you try to have access to the disadvantage, the charging, the pricing has to be different. So I think this has to be totally rethought through, not by just the technologists, but by sociologists and economists. Okay, are there any hope? Yeah, I painted a kind of interesting picture, but the answer is yes. This is the hope. Maybe this is the prayer. I show this particular photo because I take an example. There are many low Earth orbit satellites now that are proposing to provide internet service to many places in the world that doesn't have fiber and wireless connectivity. SpaceX, OneWeb. And this particular example I pick is Amazon's Project Kuiper. It has 3,200 satellites. It has low latency, very low latency because the satellite's in low Earth orbit. And it is will provide unserved and underserved communities around the world, which has about 4 billion population. I picked the picture on the left because Egypt is conspicuously in here, and they would have many satellites over Egypt. plan. And I actually talked to the person who was in charge, the senior vice president in charge of this. I asked him, how much? Okay. You know, to get he was touting gigabit access. I said, okay, gigabit. I pay for 100 megabit per second, $100 a month. It's not affordable. He said, how about $10 a month for gigabit? I said, really? I hope he's right. I haven't seen the design and the cost benefit and all the life cycle costs of the deployment. But Amazon is a pretty serious company, as we know. I hope he's right, because this may actually change the equation and actually produce universal access. And he said gigabit. Now, notice earlier I said at least 10 megabit is required. If 10 megabit is required, can I reduce that 10 to $3 a month? You know, $10 a month is non-trivial to some population on Earth. It is affordable a little bit, but it would be much nicer if it is $2 or $3 a month. Okay, now I want to talk about some of the things that changes the technology development and future. You heard about contact tracing. Baseline is very simple. If we identify a person who has been infected, we want to know who he has contact with. If he contacts 4 people, I want to trace them. And if they are in turn infected, I want to confirm it. Hopefully, I can ask him to go test. And then in addition to him, I want to know who else he has contact with to go down the tree and try to help contain the pandemic. For those of them who never get it, I would just leave them alone. So this idea is not new. The idea is just to interrupt the transmission and reduce the spread via isolation and proactive treatment. The only thing different is now we are relying on sensor and networking technology, so the time scale is much faster. We cannot wait for a week or a month. In the old days, when we hardly travel, it's okay to probably wait for a couple of days. The infected person is not going on the plane and travel halfway around the world. Today, now, is not possible. So this is very important. Stuff are going on right now. You probably know. What are some of the contact tracing technology? I picked this picture because this is Boston. On one side is Boston on the river, and on this side is Cambridge, and this is MIT under this yellow boundary. It's the case where there is someone detected to have the virus, probably just landed in the airport and took a taxi to the hotel, high-end hotel in Copley Square. And he contacted several people. For me, I want to know who he has contacted, and the guy crossed the river and come to my campus. In fact, I want to avoid him like the plague. In fact, he is the plague, right? So the question is, how fast can I detect him? Okay. Now, this is non-trivial. Okay. Not only do I need to locate the person who is infected. First of all, I have to decide he's infected. I'll come to that in just a bit. I need to have his GPS location. So he has to turn on location tracking of his smartphone. I want to see where he went into my building. So video camera needs to assess his presence. Now I have to do face recognition. There are many face recognition programs in the world. And that's a key technology in tracing where everybody has gone to. However, all this is easier said than done. To some extent, it's done in some country. They use it to penalize people for jaywalking or littering or whatever. There's a privacy issue involved in it. So there has to be a dialogue between the legal community, the government, and to talk about what kind of policy regulation should be there and still not suspend civil liberty. There is no easy answer to this. there is a trade-off. And can somebody opt not to do it? If you don't do it for a large fraction of the population, this whole thing is for moot. Even if you do it, who funds it? Is it the nation that funds it from taxpayer money? Is it up to the local people to do it? Is it going to be donation by private citizen? That's going to be a little tricky, right? So these are questions that must be answered, but there is no simple answer right now. I want to talk about something even more advanced. In order to set the stage, I want to talk about what is called cognitive and resilient network. The network of the future is going to have this smartness, and it is captured in this cognitive engine. It actually looks at the traffic, and even when the traffic is dormant, it would probe the network actively and try to figure out the network state. And the idea is to make sure the network is not overwhelmed. It has to make decisions on load balancing, reconfiguration, and restoration of down parts. And moreover, he has to predict the intention of the user so that when he is driving a big truck through, I have enough resources to get out of the way. And if not, I would have to somehow slow him down. So I need to think about his intention and recommend appropriate actions, either by the operator or signal the user to please reduce your data rate and your hosing of the network. So the idea is that this also has to look in reliability aspect, because if you overwhelm and congest the network, there goes the reliability. And then there's a security aspect. When you're trying to bring data about certain areas for processing, you want to make sure some of this data, first of all, is genuine, and second, it arrives on time, and the network is not being jammed. So I want to talk about how to use this for an advanced version of contact tracing. I call that future emerging approaches and solutions. I think the most important thing in the pandemic we learned is that early detection is very, very good. We can contain the damage. So we need to install high sensitivity, high selectivity sensor. There are smartphones on your body, a number of things. You do everything, IoT. We want to find the parents of that pandemic or that local hotspot. In fact, if we find patient zero, so much the better. But we can't take forever doing it. The response management has to find the affected individual. So we involve collection, data processing, data analysis, and immediately make a decision on who and track them and disseminate the information to every interested party. Not everyone, but only interested party. That's the trick. We need to harvest and analyze the real-time digital footprint of infected groups and individuals through traffic analysis, sensors, all the social media. Give us a hint of what's going on in that local. I'll have a view graph next to talk about that. We want to talk about anomaly in the network. Something is happening in this network that doesn't seem to be normal. We want to know what it is. So machine learning algorithm to look at previous event and current event and identify something is different. Is it a pandemic? And weak analysis. When a hotspot goes on, we want to analyze how it spread. And it would help us in terms of learning how fast and what is the pattern of the spreading. So these are new emerging approaches, and some of them are just talk. They're not there yet. Some of them are actually under active research by many, many people. And this pandemic makes it accelerated. So this is an example of what it can be, an example. This is an example of H1N1 2009. You can find it in the reference I show you. It turns out WHO is the World Health Organization rely on the standard report and things like that, and provide the count of affected people in the red curve. If actually used as some of these things I am talking about, like infer biometric, sick people actually have a distinct digital footprint. He can go from this very active person biking around to look at this guy miserable, lying in bed and very sick. By the fact that he is there in midday and immobile and not move for a long time, and actually looking at the website for fever and diarrhea or respiratory distress, then he probably is sick. Okay, so many of this data analytics can actually identify early effect of the spread of pandemic. In fact, this is a research paper, it's already 10 years old, that with those algorithms that was known then, 10 years ago, you can predict the peak of the pandemic 2 weeks earlier than the World Health Organization. And I would say it is easily much better today. So many of these advanced technology can be used. They all use networking and sensing and data analytics and the like. Okay, the use of machine learning and AI is very important. And I don't want to talk about the nitty-gritty of where they are used and things like that, but I want to address the ones that are highlighted in red. In terms of application, you can actually find out that there are events that's occurring that are very unusual. All of a sudden, the pharmacy has 3 times the increase of people going to buy Tylenol, acetaminophen. Okay, my God, that's a fever outbreak. People are actually trying to buy decongestion, 5 times as much. Something is wrong in that particular city next to that pharmacy. Okay, network security. There is a big issue about, should I let you track me? Am I going to volunteer my signature to let you track me? It may help me if I'm being exposed, but what are you going to use with that particular information? Are you going to sell me something? Are you going to track me and things like that? Well, there's a civil liberty issue there. There's also a freedom issue there. So this is the same thing here, group association and tracking. You can actually say, oh, I meet this guy in the cafe. And because of contact tracing, I want to trace everyone. Are you trying to find out who my friends are? That's also an issue. So these are questions that you have to answer. The whole idea is that continuous assessment is required, and the data center is the brain of this whole system. And it looking at the data, it would say, okay, I see something unusual. Let me start a data analytic and look further into the healthcare system, the number of people in the hospital and things like that. In fact, I want to tell you that this actually worked. The people at Harvard this week announced that they suspect China had indication of the pandemic as early as October. They just used the Google map and look at the parking lot of the hospital, that somehow in October, the number of cars in the parking lot doubled that of previous year. And it is so in all the hospitals in Wuhan. So even that by itself tells you there is something going on and worthwhile of looking in a couple months earlier than you actually realize you have a problem. And that's very key to pandemic control. The last issue I want to talk about before I conclude is the whole idea of fake news and disinformation. It is very easy on social network to spread rumors, disinformation, and false information, and actually can drive public reaction into the wrong state. I'll give you an example that we have examined. In 2014, in Napa Valley in California, the wine country, there was an earthquake, and there were a lot of fires and a serious issue. Now, some group actually put on actually injected it into a government web that says certain areas or certain roads for evacuation had traffic jam, and they advised them to take other roads. What happened was that wasn't so, and the other roads were all jammed up, and it really impeded the speed of evacuation. And then even worse, they would say, well, a certain city has armed insurgents that are robbing, try to avoid the city. In fact, there is none. Now, this is just being mischievous, okay? On the other hand, it makes a big difference in how you respond to pandemic and things like this. So what are the motivations? I don't know what the motivations are, but there are best practices that people follow. How can we have this? Well, that's not enough, it turns out, okay? So what are the potential solutions? It doesn't require invention, but it requires some kind of fortitude, stomach fortitude to do this. You can fact check whether this is true. You can say that this particular report is inconsistent with other reports. You don't have to make a judgment. You just have to point out the inconsistency and let the reader decide whether you believe this news or 20 other pieces of news that says otherwise. It needs extra cost of processing. That's the problem. One of these social networks can do it. They have the facility, they have the know-how, but it requires significant processing to identify correlated reports that are contradictory and say there are 20 reports that doesn't support this. Okay, so the cost aspect is tough. They're not being paid for by the user. And when you do this, you may reduce revenue because some user who want to play mischief didn't want to subscribe to you. So number 4 and 5 in this particular case are the impediment of putting fact check on social network. That leads to whether you should use it by legislation. You should modify your policy and regulation and say, okay, you are responsible for somehow putting false news that are affecting the population. You don't have to make judgment. You can point out the inconsistency. Who funds such effort in terms of extra cost of processing? And can you install penalties for irresponsible practices? These are things that is under heated debate within the US and elsewhere in the world. I think it's a very important issue to tackle. So finally, one of the most important things is privacy and security. When you have your personal information being looked at by all kinds of algorithms, how can you be sure that your data is protected while being stored or actually while being processed? I want privacy. I want make sure nobody masquerades as me. So authentication and cryptography is very important. If everybody wants very strong privacy and don't contact tracing would be very difficult. So the question is, where's the right balance? How do you assure that the person under contact tracing, his other privacy is not compromised? And the quality assurance of the network so that when you need it, it will be there. And how do you screen out the real-time application? And something which I won't expand is graphic processing unit on the network actually can do real-time monitoring of session and tell you which are the important messages that has to go through. So I have some final thoughts, and then I would open for discussion. I think there is definitely open research required for many of these virtual platforms. They need to be improved. The biggest issue is the digital divide, the gulf between rich and poor. It cannot be solved by technology alone. It has to be a discussion on social economic impacts by everybody involved. It's a public discussion between the population and the business world. There will be a new normal, but many of these electronic mediums are here to stay. In fact, I'm going to appoint an ad hoc committee very soon in my society to look into what is the new normal. How are we going to conduct business in the future? It has to involve social, economic, policy, regulation, legal, and public funding aspect. It is not, if those of you who are interested, look into Ireland. They have a very healthy discussion and policy made, and see how they do it. Now, they are, of course, it's a smaller country, easier than a big country like the United States or even Egypt. So we have to pay attention to the disinformation and false information. Easily can drive society into undesirable and the wrong state. The wrong state is the key word. As we rely more and more on networking and information we find on the network, this becomes even more important. The conclusion is we need to have a balanced approach, not just technical, but economic and social aspect. We have to look into policy, regulation, public-private funding, and collaborations. Finally, I want to remark that if you look at many of the new and important engineering achievements in the world, many of them, not all of them, are triggered by unusual events. You think about the Second World War, the emergence of radar and cryptography. There was a reason. People working very hard to get it done. It's more than just speculated academic research. There is a goal, and this event, called the Second World War, had driven the innovative people to try to find a solution. I think the pandemic is such an event, and I think it would trigger everybody to think in a very agile way. And the time scale for innovation and adaptation and formulation of new solution is going to be 10, 100 times faster than it otherwise would be. So I think in the communications and network area, if we're going to be leading in this particular climate, we need to think about what we need to do, and not just technical, but engage policy people to talk about what are the right thing to do and how we go about doing it. So with that, I want to end my address.